Former spoiled rotten kids, when did the real world really hit you? I was a spoiled rotten child, and also into my teen years. My parents bought me a brand new red convertible for my 16th birthday. I threw a fit over it, because what I actually wanted was my brother's old car that we still had, which was dark blue in color. I was so shallow and a horrible person back then. So what really turned me around? That next summer I took a job as a camp counselor at a local day camp. I did not have to work, but I was bored and sounded like something easy to do. I was so wrong. This day camp was specifically geared to the lower classes who could not afford childcare during the summer. We served them breakfast, lunch, and an afternoon snack. For a lot of the camp kids, this was all they would eat that day, and on Fridays they would beg for extra food/snacks to take home for themselves and or their siblings, because they may not get to eat again until Monday. This really hit me hard, but the part that got me the most, this one kid, around 5 to 6, would refuse to take their shoes and socks off, even if we were going to the public pool that day. I couldn't understand why until one day he came in limping, like his feet were causing him so much pain. I convinced him to let me help him get his shoes and socks, so I could see what might be bothering him. Once I did, it took everything in me not to break down right there. His socks were covered in blood. His poor tiny little feet were covered in sores and his toes seemed to curl under a bit. He was in so much pain from the state of his feet. As it turns out, he had been wearing shoes about 3 sizes too small. His family couldn't afford new shoes. I took my lunch break and went out to buy him new socks and a few pairs of shoes. This broke me, which I definitely needed. It changed my way of thinking forever. I grew up in Indonesia, a third world country, where you definitely have maids if you're posting on Reddit. I grew up thinking it's common to have multiple maids. Moved to Singapore, a first world country, where people still have maids, but it's more of an upper middle class and above thing. Got assigned to sweep the floors by the teachers, and that was my first time holding a broom. Swept it back and forth like in cartoons, and everyone was looking at me going, "Yeah, what the hell are you doing?" Turns out I was just creating a dust cloud around me. You have to sweep in one direction and gather all the dust into the dustpan. Mind blown. Grew up in a fancy home, more rooms than you could ever need on a large property in a pretty rural area. I got everything I wanted whenever I wanted. Huge plasma TV, DSLR camera, motorbike, pony, etc. I never knew what my parents really did for a living. I remember kids always asking what my parents did as a job in the playground and I never really knew how to respond. I soon figured out what my parents did when my dad was arrested for drug trafficking and the house, cars and everything else was repossessed by the government as profits of crime. I now live in a crappy house that barely stands in a dodgy area of town. It definitely was a shock to the system, but I'm adjusting just fine, I guess. I was raised by my great grandmother. She was well-to-do, active, well into her 80s, and her world revolved around me. Ballet, gymnastics, all the music classes I could fit in my schedule. I had a menagerie of pets. Christmases were obscene. She catered to my every whim as a child. Now that I'm an adult and my wonderful gram has passed, I've learned that what I had was really unique. The world does not wait for me. I'm not special to everyone. I struggle with entitlement and narcissistic tendencies. It's isolating at times, and I miss her. I grew up in a Midwestern town, middle class neighborhood, private school, etc. I never needed anything, but my dad grew up poor and my parents wouldn't give in to any of my big wants. Super Nintendo I never got. Haha. My neighbor and best friend got everything he asked for. I loved hanging at his house because he had the best TV, the best food, the newest video games, 100 pairs of shoes, and 1000 hats. After we moved away, I found out that his parents gave him anything he wanted because they were in a loveless marriage and constantly fought around him. They were buying love when my parents were showing me love. I always wondered why he would prefer to stay at my house with a crappy TV and an outdated Nintendo with no games. Turns out he wanted to stay at our house because my parents didn't fight and would actually listen to him. My parents became surrogate parents for him, and to this day he calls them mom and dad. I'm happy to call him brother. If it weren't for him, I would never have known how I won the parental lottery. When I was 16, my parents left for a week vacation, and gave me money for the week. Since I didn't know how to do laundry, never even seen it done, I took all my clothes to the dry cleaner. Even my panties. The cleaners asked 3 times if I was sure I wanted them dry cleaned. I said yes. 2 days later I got 8 pair of panties safety pinned to individual hangers. My laundry cost about $90 that week. I just assumed this was all normal. The real world hit me only much later. It's only in retrospect I see I was spoiled. Sort of around when I had a limited allowance and budget in college. I was spoiled but not rich. More naive than anything. I grew up with my mother doing everything for me. I was never taught many things because she would do everything. She's an amazing mother, don't get me wrong, but I wish I was taught more. Well, I have a job now where I take care of mentally disabled adults. You basically have to do everything. You have to do all of the cooking, all of the cleaning, all of the laundry, and you have to shower clients and change their clothes and diapers. Some of them can change themselves. I'd say that this job is helping me a lot. It's giving me more experience in the real world and a great opportunity to help my patients and spend time with them. At 20, when I started dating my now husband, he was raised by a single mom who worked 3 jobs, and they still barely got by, while my mom was a stay-at-home mom and my dad was / successful in his line of work. Husband and I went to high school together. At the beginning of every school year, my parents would easily drop $15K on me and my sister for school clothes. My husband would go with our high school secretary to get clothes that were paid for by the school district. I didn't even know that was a thing. My husband and I have known each other for years and were always friends. We got together a couple of years after high school for a drunken night complaining about exes and discovered we share a lot of the same ideas about relationships in general. We moved in together 3 weeks later. Lol. He makes decent money now, and yes, he's handsome AF. Sometimes I just stare at him, and I'm just like, how? Also, my parents are wealthy, I'm not. We live modestly and have very little wiggle room every month, but I truly and honestly don't give a crap because we are really happy. My roommate in college was a former Marine. He was basically like, 1. I'm not cleaning up this crap for you, and 2. This crap will be cleaned up. When I moved out of my hometown for college, it was an absolute culture shock. I met other students who couldn't go to their dream schools because of how much it cost, so they had to go in-state. They didn't eat out every other day. They bought second-hand clothes. Some had never traveled out of the country, some never even out of the state. Some were driving their parents' first cars. That crap blew my mind. This is how the rest of the 99% of the country lives. I come from a filthy rich background, but I work hard to hide it so that you can't tell. I dress normally. I don't really talk about my background. I try to buy stuff on sale. Sometimes it shows in ways that I can't help. I'd never seen crappy cars before going to college. I don't know how to drive cars with poor handling, and I always forget to turn off the headlights because I've never driven a car without automatic lights. I don't know how much anything costs because it doesn't matter. I'll still buy it anyway. I also don't really value money. $100 just isn't a big deal to me, but I know it means a lot to others, so I don't mind giving it to friends who are in need. But if you don't look too closely at my habits, you can't tell. And that was a conscious decision that I've made. I'm grateful for never having to worry about money, and I likely never will. But I don't want to go back to my hometown because I think the lifestyle is unhealthy. There's so much entitlement, and the worst part is how rich people think that money defines your worth. I've seen them look at people with less money with such disdain, like their value as a person is less, since they don't have as much money. It's disgusting. And I don't want to be associated with that kind of person. I also loathe the comments that come with it, like, if I were rich like you. And I put an end to those immediately if they come up. I don't like being treated differently because of how much money I have, and I won't treat you differently for how much money you have. We are both people, and we are both worth something. I wasn't necessarily spoiled, but I definitely grew up in a very privileged family. Upper middle class, academic dad and lawyer mum. I was 17 and I got a job as a porter at a hotel to save and travel for a bit before going to uni. My dad lives in Singapore, so I figured Southeast Asia. I went to Indonesia, Yogyakarta to see Borobudur, and I was staying in a decent but not crazy fancy hotel near the temple. It was my first night, and I had no idea if tipping was a normal thing, and didn't have any rupiah on me, so I put a $5 bill under my plate when I left. As the waitress cleared the plates, and I was walking away, she freaked out, thinking I had left it there. She didn't speak a lot of English, but I got it across that it was a tip, and she basically broke down. It was a lot of money, so I was really confused. Made the mistake of googling median wages of the area when I got back. Median, not even minimum, salary is about $3,000 a year. What I made in about 2 hours at a minimum wage hotel job, she made in a week busting ass for 80 hours. I tipped well all through my trip. Even bought the crappy knickknacks from the hawkers by the temple. I realized that some people really struggle with money. I thought people didn't buy the things they need, cars, appliances, clothes, a nice house, because they were really frugal and saving up. It's not even that I didn't know about poverty, but I thought it was a third world thing and that everyone in the US is pretty comfortable. This didn't sink in until college. I'm terrified for after college. I grew up thinking we had money. Turns out we didn't. My parents just spoiled me every time I threw a fit. When I was 16, I chose to do a BO assignment on my mom because I realized I knew little of her youth. When my Mexican mother told me her best birthday gift was every 3 years she'd get new slippers since she tore through her one pair from growing, and that her annual gift was fabric to make her own dress. I had recently begged for a homecoming gown that was $250, so that made me feel crappy, and that she didn't see a movie until she was 17 years old, which hurt me the most, since cinema had shaped my life up to that point. The thought of being deprived of such lovely escapism was hard to hear. She also never had an education, and didn't read until her late 30s. Learning about how my mother grew up was life-changing to me. We weren't rich, but I was so spoiled rotten. I'm not sure it was because my parents knew what it was like to have nothing. She grew up in a rural farm without electricity, and when she moved to America for the first time at 23, she asked her soon-to-be husband what the white machine in the kitchen was, and he said a dishwasher. To which she replied, "I knew white women were lazy. Lol." This inspired me to never ask for money or beg again. Starting that month, I saved 3 months of wage to buy my first real camera at 16. I now make way more than I thought possible with my camera, and I don't think without her struggles and hearing her struggles, I would ever get close. Military boot camp. Wanted to eat an orange. Didn't know how to peel one. Slyly waited for someone else to start peeling before emulating him. End up with a badly squashed, untidily peeled orange bowl that tasted like sour reality. Boom. Evolved. I was spoiled rotten until my mid-20s. My parents gave me anything I wanted. When a new gaming generation came out, I would get every system and essentially every launch game. In high school, I drove nicer cars than all of my classmates' parents, and I had 3 different cars depending on how I felt. 2 of them were brand new sports cars, and the other was an older, but a very desirable sports car. I never paid for gas or insurance. Never paid a phone bill. Didn't pay for food, movies, snacks, anything. I was given almost limitless amounts of money to spend on whatever I wanted. My parents paid for my college tuition, and I later worked in the family business and was paid a very good wage for being simply who I was. I wasn't a slouch, Paresi, but I had a false sense of security due to things being handed to me for years. My perspective of life was that you are always on an upward trajectory to earn more. I swore that by 25 I would own a Lamborghini and a $500,000 house, at least. Anything less than that would be an abysmal failure. While living in this excess, I met a girl who grew up poor. She didn't live in poverty, but she had to work since a very young age and had to help pay the family's bills. Basically, she lived a life that I deathly feared. Her financial situation stabilized by the time we started dating, but her life experience gave her a pretty solid background. I initially approached our relationship from a position of wanting to give her the finer things in life. I spent thousands of my parents' money on her to take her on trips and buy her jewelry. She was never comfortable with it and frequently said that she is fine with a cheap dinner and a movie. She and I got married and were expecting a child soon after. My great awakening came when the family business fell to pieces. Suddenly the endless supply of money stopped. It was so bad that I couldn't even receive a salary and had to look for a job. I had a college degree, but really no discernible skill set. Finding a job wasn't the easiest thing in the world for me to do. I eventually found a very entry-level job in a completely different field. The salary was incredibly low by any measure. For the first time had to pay for gas, insurance, phone, food etc. The high-performance car I drove took premium fuel and got abysmal gas mileage. I sold it and bought the cheapest car that was safe and new enough to keep my family on the road I could find. I never drove anything so cheap in my life, was never paid so little, and had to pay bills for the first time in my life. I had to perform at work because I was almost literally living paycheck to paycheck. Oh yeah, I racked up tons of credit card debt being irresponsible and knowing I could easily pay it until I couldn't. My one constant? My wife was unflappable. She had been in far worse situations before. She was pregnant yet calm, cool, and collected despite the sudden life change. She didn't stress and essentially pulled up her sleeves and devised a budget for the household to see us through our new reality. It was clear why we were put together. I thought I was the man. Look who ended up taking care of whom. This experience taught me that money didn't matter. Not only does it not matter, but it can disappear in an instant. I became closer to my wife, new sun in my faith after this experience. I wouldn't change it for the world. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, hit like, get subscribed, and tell us if you have ever met a spoiled kid in the comment section, and support the original writers with upvotes. Links in the description box.